Hello. Today, in this session, we are going to discuss the significance of Romantic period and its background. We would be talking about how the Romantic movement was shaped in the end of 18th century. I want to discuss the brief historical background to this very important literary movement in England. Let's discuss this today. I'm going to share the screen with you and let's see how this great movement took shape in 18th century itself. I am Dr. Gurunath Badiger, Associate Professor of English, Government First Year College and PG Center, Dharwad. Let's talk about the background of Romantic period. In this, we would be talking about how to understand the beginnings of Romantic movement with a perspective of 18th century literature, to understand the historical events like French Revolution, to know the beginnings of Romantic age, and to realize the socio-economic conditions of that time. Our outcome would be the historical background of Romantic movement. Before we understand the Romantic movement, we should have some knowledge of 18th century literature. Most of the time, all movements are reactions against their preceding movements. And 19th century Romantic period is certainly a reaction against the 18th century classical literature. We all know that 18th century classical literature is known for its satirical tone. Because of our party politics, we see the Whigs and Tories, the two political parties, and it was predominantly the period of prose and reason, as Matthew Arnold pointed out. He says it is essentially an age of prose and reason. That's why, because of the clubs and coffee houses, we come across the great clubs like White Chocolate Club, Will's Club, St. James Coffee House, Kit Kat clubs, where we see the production of great periodical literature, political pamphleteering, and obviously it was dominated by prose. We see the great writers like Edison and Steele, Daniel Defoe. Edison and Steele published the Spectator Papers, Coverley Papers, the Spectator Club, Tatler. Daniel Defoe was also a great prose writer as well as a novelist. Dr. Johnson came out with Preface to Shakespeare, Lives of the Poets. Oliver Goldsmith was a great prose writer. He created the character of Blue Tibbs, Man in Black. The novelists, this age was also known for great novels, particularly Four Wheels of Novel, Samuel Richardson, who is famous for Pamela, Henry Fielding, who is famous for Joseph Andrews, Lawrence Sterne, who is known for Tristram Shandy, and Tobias Smollett, who is known for Humphrey Clinker, and Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders and Robinson Crusoe are outstanding Even the poetry of 18th century was prosaic. It has a classical tone, and it was dominated by the great poet like Alexander Pope. The age is also called Augustan age because you see the Augustan classicism in 18th century. It's also known as Neo-Classical age. If we read, an essay on man, on criticism, the rape of the lock, the Dunciad, it gives us uh, the great literature of classical tone. Gradually, in 18th century, the second half of 18th century saw the beginning of Romantic movement. Even such traces are found in Thomas Gray's Elegy written in country churchyard. Although it is written in classical tone, the subject matter of elegy is rather pastoral. It describes the village atmosphere, it describes the peasants, it describes the simplicities of the unknown peasants. Oliver Goldsmith's An Elegy on the Death of Mad Dog, the deserted village, slowly traces. The style was classical, but the content was rather rural. 18th century was primarily known for its urban literature, sophistication, that is slowly moving towards rustic life. Such deviation is found in William Cowper's The Task, Robert Burns' My Love is Like Red, Red Rose. And these poets, particularly William Cowper, Robert Burns, James Thomson, and William Blake, begin to show the offspring of Romanticism. And the task wherein we come across wonderful poetic lines. My Love is Like Red, Red Rose by Robert Burns is purely a romantic poem, a great lyric we read about. Thompson's The Seasons provides you another example of wonderful nature poem by a poet in 18th century. William Blake almost heralded the beginning of Romanticism, the songs of innocence, where we come across representative poems like The Lamb, and the songs of experience, wherein we have a representative poem like The Tiger, are the best examples of romantic poetry. So, looking into all these things, Thompson, Gray, Cowper, Blake, and Blair, we see in the end of 18th century or the last quarter of 18th century saw a lot of activities of romantic movement. To add to this, we see some historical incidents which triggered the imagination of Europe. And that is the breaking point. You see the French Revolution in 1789, what we see, the fall of Bastille, heralded democratic ideals, and we see the philosophy of Rousseau, go back to nature. The words, the buzzing words of French Revolution, liberty, fraternity, and equality. And this, in fact, triggered the imagination of romantic poets. Poets were inspired by the historical events. Wordsworth, bubbling with joy, wrote in his poem, "Bliss was it that dawned to be alive, but to be young was very heaven." Yes, Wordsworth was overjoyed. Of course, later Wordsworth was disappointed. That's a different part of the story. But even Coleridge also wrote in praise of French Revolution. This is the historical event, in fact, which mm, gave an example of common man's victory over all the established institutions. If you look at the social and economic background, the first phase of industrial revolution was about 1750 to 1850. It has seen a lot of changes, a lot of industrialization. We read about the use of engines, we read about coal mining, we read about big machines, steam engines. And there were major changes in agriculture, manufacturing, mining, transportation, and technology. Of course, it led to social unrest and violent class conflict, which we see in the later part of Romanticism, and it becomes the major subject of Victorian literature in the second half of 19th century. What I mean to say, the Romantic movement was shaped by both literary as well as historical incidents. Literary incidents, it was a reaction against the classical or what you call Neo-Classicism. Historical and political things, if you look at these things, that the French Revolution was one of the major events that directly influenced the triggering of Romantic movement in England. It's like fall of Constantinople in 1453, which uh, augured which heralded the coming of Renaissance in Europe. Similarly, the Romantic movement was in fact shaped by the fall of Bastille in France in 1789. What is this Romantic movement? It's an artistic, literary, and intellectual movement, partly a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. It was embodied strongly in visual arts, music, and literature, and was associated with liberalism and radicalism. You can see these words here. It is associated with visual arts. The same thing happened in Renaissance time, the Renaissance paintings. Similarly, you have that kind of liberalism is found here. Music and literature. So literature is greatly influenced by Romantic movement, and it is associated with liberalism, and radical thinking, free thinking. That's why you come across a lot of subjective literature, a lot of liberal literature. Of course, the movement was rooted in the German Sturm and Drang movement and legitimized the individual imagination as critical authority. So, looking at this particular uh, movement, we come to know that this led to the rise of great poetry, great prose, and wonderful novels. We begin to see this with the publication of lyrical ballads in 1798. It ends with the accession of Queen Victoria in 1837. This moment is really the second golden age in the history of English literature. It is also called a second Renaissance. It is also called Renaissance of Wonder by Walt Danton. We will discuss the remaining things like characteristics and important poets in the later sessions. Today, I end this session with the conclusion that the 18th century literature, which was rather very perspirating, which was very strongly classical was opposed by the new generation of poets who started romantic movement. And obviously French Revolution was the turning point, and it in fact heralded the idea of liberty, fraternity, and equality. And the poets of England, who were very much influenced by such a movement, published poems, wrote poems in the romantic strain. I hope you understand what is Romanticism and how it was shaped by the historical incidents that happened in 18th century. Thank you.